My name is Greg Clausen. I served in the Minnesota Senate for 10 years, from 2013 to 2022. And at that point, I decided to retire after 10 years. I served the communities of Apple Valley, Rosemont, Northeast Lakeville, and Coates. And if you're familiar with Coates on Highway 52 that goes to Rochester, I went all the way to the Mississippi River. So I had some farmers, I had suburban constituents in my group. I've been a resident for Apple Valley, from Apple Valley High School, Apple Valley for 40 years. And my wife and I have been HOA homeowners for about 20 years. And I currently serve on our Landscape and Architectural Committee of our homeowner association. You know, how many of you have heard in the past, you know, there ought to be a law somewhere on an issue that you're confronted with? So I thought a starting point would be, where do ideas for legislation come from? Well, they really come from ordinary citizens like yourselves that have a concern or an idea. That's where most of my laws came from. People would contact me. A man from Rosemont contacted me. His brother was hit head on with two of his friends on a sunny June day a few years ago. They were going on a fishing trip into Wisconsin. They were on Interstate 94. A guy who had been huffing dust off that they use, you know, to spray your computer to get the dust off. He'd been huffing that, got on the freeway the long way in the middle of the day, hit him head on, killing all three. And he discovered that if that accident had happened in Minnesota, they couldn't have been prosecuted to the full extent as they were in Wisconsin. So we worked on a bill to change outdated legislation in Minnesota. That's one example. Another example, a truck driver, a big 16-wheel truck driver who was down in Mankato, was in a roundabout and he got stopped by the police. And the police said, you can't use both lanes. Well, with the big truck, how can you go a roundabout? So we changed some legislation there. We had an opioid bill because we have an opioid epidemic. And one of the things that in passing a bill, you don't want to make mistakes and have unintended consequences. But that bill that we passed in Minnesota had unintended consequences because there were people that needed a certain dosage of opioids every day just to function. And what the bill did, it cut it down, so some of these people were not getting their regular dose and it was affecting them very negatively. There's another example, being contacted by a person in our legislative district. Representative Bierman and I worked on that. It took us almost 3 years to get legislation passed, but we did that, and now that legislation is being used in a number of states to kind of deal with issues that are affecting people in a negative way. But some other examples of groups that come forward. Different organizations, nonprofits, business organizations, veteran groups. One of my favorites is Howling for Wolves. This was a group that would come and see me every legislative session. And you knew they were there because they would actually howl their presence when they came into the office or in the anteway to the office. Lobbyists represent special interest groups, and they will bring forward bills for you to consider and look at. School districts, cities and counties, university systems, colleges, business groups, government agencies, they will usually come forward and say, we need to have these fixes in the state of Minnesota to really serve people. So that happens. And also, you know, our political groups, they have political agendas that they want to pass. And now I'm happy that the HOA Legislative Network is going to be one of those groups that's going to represent thousands of people to make change in the state of Minnesota. So the big question, what do we really want to accomplish? What do we want to do? You know, a little bit of that is unknown right now. The one thing I would say that we need to do is to change where the Department of Commerce has HOA's insurance, because we are with the businesses and corporations. We should be on the other side, individual. There's a lot less scrutiny for the business side of insurances than there are for the individual. And I think if we can get moved, that would help in one direction. But I think it'll become a little bit clearer what we want to accomplish as we start working through a process. The main thing is that we do have a common goal. Higher insurance costs, as you know, are raising our monthly dues and potentially shifting more coverage to our personal HO6 policies. So as a starting point, we really need to raise awareness to affect change in the insurance industry here in Minnesota. Now, just to give you a little bit of an idea, though, that this is not easy. It takes a lot of work. Each year, there are over 5,000 bills that are drafted and introduced in the Senate and 5,000 in the House, more than that, almost 6,000. Some of those bills are exactly the same. Some are similar. Some are standalone bills. And one of the things you need to be aware of, less than 5% of the bills that are actually written and introduced are ever passed into law, only 5%. And so you really have to get out there and advocate. And I'm going to apologize for this next slide. I didn't want this to be political, but some of you may be wondering, is this guy a Republican or is he a Democrat? So this picture probably will give it away that I'm a Democrat. This slide really talks to identifying the key players who can help us develop our concerns into a bill form and advocate to move the bill along. We've got a great group of lawyers in the legislature that will actually formulate the language for a bill. You don't have to come already with the bill in hand. They will work with you and put together a bill so that it's in the right format and has the right provisions in it. But the first step is really finding your champions. And who might they be? Well, the first one is legislative champions. They need to have an interest, a support, and act on your concerns. And so you have to go out and find those people. Now, when I was in the legislature and I had a bill, for instance, that dealt with mental health issues, I knew exactly the other members of the legislature that I could go to because they had that similar interest and they would support the bill as a co-author. And so we need to find those people who might be interested in HOA legislation. The big thing is, I know that there are HOA members in the legislature, and they're dealing with some of these same issues. And they probably have parents that may be in HOAs. They have family members or friends residing in HOAs. So I think there's a big population that we can reach out to for support. Other key people in the legislature certainly would be the Speaker in the House, the President of the Senate, the majority and minority leaders in the House and Senate, who set the agenda really for the upcoming session. They meet and they usually, the political party that is in charge will create their top 5 bills. They'll be number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And those, they set an agenda, this is what we want to accomplish. And those are key things that they're going to be working on. But in addition to that, there's all kinds of other bills that individual senators and House of Representatives will take up and advocate for. Now, one of the things that's also important would be the committee chairs. These are people that run the various committees, and there's usually, in the House, there's 18, 19 various committees, and in the Senate, there's usually fewer than that, 12 to 14. And the committee chairs have a great deal of power because they set the agenda for their committee. And they will make decisions on what bills will be heard, what bills will not be heard. And it's hard to predict where a bill for HOA might end up because it's assigned. It'll be assigned to a committee if we get a bill. And the 2 that I'm thinking would probably deal with an HOA bill would be the Commerce Department or the Commerce Committee, and that's chaired by Senator Matt Klein. He lives in Mendota Heights, so he's very close. Some of you maybe are are constituents of Matt's. Matt is a physician with the Mayo Clinic, so he commutes every day down to Rochester, where that's his home base. And he would be a good person that we need to contact. The Housing Committee in the Senate is Lindsay Port. Lindsay Port is from Burnsville. Again, probably some of you are constituents. So we've got quite a few people in the South Metro area that are key decision makers in the Senate and the House. Robert Bierman, who's a member of the House and from Apple Valley. He's on the Commerce Committee in the House. Mike Howard from Richfield, he chairs the Housing Committee in the House. So those are certainly some groups that would be important people to contact. Just share a quick story. I had a bill a few years ago in front of the Commerce Committee. How many of you are familiar with evergreen contracts? They're a pain. These are ones that constantly will just be renewed. You don't have to do anything. But if you ever try to drop them, it's almost impossible to find out who do you contact, how do you go about it. So I had a bill to kind of address that, to kind of make sure that individuals could actually drop that. And I got a committee hearing with Jim Metzen at the time. Jim has passed away, unfortunately, but he was the chair of the Commerce Committee at the time. He was from South St. Paul. And he gave me a hearing. And so I brought some people in from the Attorney General's office to talk about complaints that they had on this. I had some people testifying. And I gave my presentation, and then they allowed comments. And the lobbying group appeared. And within minutes, it was pretty apparent to me that the committee members, and especially the committee chair, was not going to move my bill ahead. And so it died. And that's just one example about influence within the legislature. Lobbyists do play a big role. They're also a group that you really rely upon as well, because they will bring a bill to you, and they've done a tremendous amount of research on it. They many times might have a draft of the bill, and I found that most of them are going to be friendly towards you if you can help them, and if they give you bad information, they know that they'll never ever come to your office again. So they have to be careful in what they are dealing with you on. The other thing is, and getting to this, is you really need to identify potential pro and con interest groups. Are there groups with a vested interest in HOAs that might assist you in advocating for our cause? And then there's others that may stand in our way. And it's important to kind of identify that. When I did the Evergreen bill, I wish I would have known some of the people that I was up against. And another example of that, when I was in the Senate, one of the first years I was in, I got a contact with a constituent who lived in an HOA. And the management company was putting a lien on her property. She was an elderly lady. She could not pay for an assessment that was being placed on the properties, and she came to me looking for help. So I kind of drafted a bill. I worked with some agencies within the government, and we drafted a bill that kind of put some restrictions on management companies about process that they had to go through before you could actually put a lien on a property. And I got a call from a management company, and they said, we'd like to talk to you about the bill. And so I said, that'd be fine. I'll meet with you. And so we met at the Apple Valley Library, and I showed up, and here's 10 people from management companies there telling me what an idiot I was, basically, for offering this bill. So those are, again, some examples. It would be good to know who's going to support you, who's not. In the back there, we've got a number of different groups that come here, and they talk about things that they can do to help HOAs in, different capacities. Maybe those are some people that might write a letter or might support us in some way. But it's good to know, who is in our corner and who might really be opposed to us. So now we're getting to, what can you do? 3 key words. And if you're going on that handout you have, there's one word you need to really add. 3 key words. You need to organize, you need to educate, and you need to advocate. 3 key things you need to do. And the other thing that's really important is, I was talking about where do bills come from. It's really good to have an organization behind you that is kind of your spokesperson. And I think the HOA can do that, the HOA leadership group here. We can do that. You're going to be the spokesperson for thousands of people across the state of Minnesota who are dealing with this insurance issue. So organize, educate, advocate. As you've heard earlier, the HOA Leadership Network has developed the HOA Insurance Call to Action Manual that was talked about today. That's really to assist members and friends in educating homeowners and legislators on the issues. And that is a big task, because that has been stated. A lot of legislators that I talk to, and I meet with a group every month, former legislators, current legislators, and lobbyists. We meet as a kind of a social group. And I talked about HOAs a couple months ago, and nope, not on our radar. Well, what is an HOA? How many are there? So that was something that we need to do. We need to organize and then educate. Just imagine, if you would, the impact that Minnesotans living in HOAs can make when directed towards a common cause. Thousands of people notifying legislators on a problem with a solution. And part of that organization too, is, as you saw this morning, is to develop materials to help explain the issues, concerns, tell your personal stories, has been talked about, and what remedies are you seeking from the legislature. In legislator terms, that's called the ask. What are you asking for? What do you want accomplished? What do you want done? Why are you contacting me? Looking for a solution. The other part of that is developing a shared common message. And again, that toolkit or the manual that was talked about earlier will do that. One of the things that I know is currently being done is there's 67 legislative districts in the state of Minnesota. There's 67 senators, 134 representatives. And we can actually get the numbers of HOAs in a legislative district, in a Senate district. So when you go to your legislature, you can say, we've got 1,400 units, or we've got 14,000 units in your legislative district that are HOAs. And here's a problem, and we need your help. And so that's another piece that is coming out as part of that call to action. But when we develop and share that common message, everyone needs to be on the same page. We can't have mixed messages going out. And I'll give you an example of that. Each year when I was in the Senate, I'd get 2 or 3 people contacting me about HOA concerns. And they always were, the board is doing this to me. The board is doing this and it's not right. And it's always the board doing something. So if we get a bunch of people that's their message, instead of let's look at insurance, that's not going to help us. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. That second word, educate. You need to educate yourself on the issues, so you're able to communicate the insurance dilemma to other people, legislators, people in your HOA. So you need to educate yourselves. And then you need to educate and influence legislators and decision makers that we talked about. And lastly, you need to advocate. You need to meet with legislators, and most legislators are very happy to meet with you. We need to start early. This upcoming legislative session is a budget biennium, and there'll be a lot of attention turned to a budget and development of a budget. And I would suggest that really starting to advocate prior to the legislative session starting would be good. And to have like a one-pager. Here's a one-pager I can leave with you about our concerns and why we need change. That would be important. You can meet at a local coffee shop in your district, or you can meet at the Capitol at Senator or House Representative's office. There are some other ways you can get in front of your legislature. Attend legislative monthly coffee hours. There are some of them that have coffee hours on a regular basis. Representative Bierman in Apple Valley, every other week, he meets with constituents that want to show up and talk. There are political rallies, especially now with the House, because all House members are up for re-election, so they're having campaign kickoffs that you can attend, or other events in your area that you can get their attention. You can send emails, you can make calls, you can write letters to legislators. Was talked about earlier, there are what we call boilerplate emails or letters. You know, you get the same one from hundreds of people that are contacting you about an issue. And that's good, because I always had my legislative assistant keep track of that. Tell me how many letters on this issue are we getting, so when it comes to a vote, they could tell me, well, you got 35 that are in favor of this bill, and you have 5 that are against the bill. And it helps then a legislator make decisions. So make those calls, send those emails, write letters to legislators. Boilerplate messages are good, but if you add a couple sentences that are boilerplate, but then talk about your personal issue, and that was mentioned before, that just adds a little bit to really make it more of a personal message. The other thing you can do is invite area legislators to the HOA board or annual meetings. And I'd also suggest that National Night Out is coming. I think that was mentioned. Invite your legislator. We, in my HOA, we always invite our area legislators to stop by. And Bob Smithberg always does it in Apple Valley, because I've been there. So they'll get invited to stop by. They might only spend 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes, but you can get in front of them and really talk a little bit about what the dilemma is and what needs to be done. I thought I'd add this next slide, because there are some things currently going on in the legislature dealing with HOAs. But these are bills, there's 2 of them. These bills have been really introduced late in the legislative process. So they really didn't get a hearing, but they're sitting there, and they can be renewed for next year. As I mentioned, there's 2 different proposals. This first one, I think, is really important to us, because there's going to be some hearings and we can get in front of a committee and make our point. And that's House File 5032. Kristen Boehner is the author, and the same bill in the Senate is Senate File 5447. It's authored by Liz Bolden, and she is also on the Senate Housing Committee, and she's from Rochester. I've contacted both these ladies, both their offices, and encouraged them because, well, I should tell you what they want to do. Both bills are word for word, so there's no difference between the 2. And what the bill basically does, it establishes a working group looking into homeowners associations, HOAs. And I'll read a little bit from the bill. They ask a lot of questions, and a lot of these are really basic. They don't mention insurance. That's why we have to get in front of this group, and we mention insurance. How many HOAs and CICs in Minnesota? What fees are associated with HOAs? Should there be uniform statutory standards regulating fees, fines, costs assessed to residents? How does the organization and management of HOAs, including boards and management companies, impact the affordability of HOAs? So this is really an important group. It's an opportunity for us to get in front of legislators and educate. They will have hearings on this. Now, I've contacted Kristen Boehner in the House. She's up for re-election. So she's probably thinking re-election. She's not thinking about holding meetings. But in the Senate, they've got 2 more years before they're going to be up for re-election. And so I've really encouraged Liz to, how about having some of those hearings on your bill prior to the beginning of the legislative session in January. And I hope that that can happen. But then we need to know when it's going to be. We need to get the word out. Show up. I mean, if we get a couple hundred people to sit in the audience and watch this, and if we can get the HOA leadership group on the agenda to testify, that will be big. And so that, I think, is really important. This bill in the House and the Senate. Then there is another bill that's offered. Paul Novotny is the author in the House, and Eric Lucero is the author in the Senate. And these two guys have kind of jumped ahead of themselves, I think, because this second bill proposes prohibiting certain property management HOA practices, amending several of Minnesota Statute 2022 that are already in place. I'll give you some examples. And part of it I agree with, because they want to go after the bad actors. Now, an example, and some of you won't like this, in other states, they have passed legislation that if you're going to be on the board, you have to go through so many hours of training. And this is kind of something that I think is coming to Minnesota. We're going to see that. I think this is really a national effort, this bill. This bill, came to the state of Minnesota from some other organization. But what they want to do, they want to prohibit management companies accepting paybacks or rebates from construction, salvage, and appraisal firms. How do you know that company they're recommending actually isn't a subsidiary of the management company that's going to do your roofs or whatever? So that's part of it. They also want to change the powers of the HOA associations. They want to limit the amount of money you can actually fine your residents. And some other things dealing with liens. And it's something I think that really have to look at. The last item that was in the bill, I had to put this into the talk. Because I hear this all the time from those people that contact me about HOA concerns. It prohibits retaliation by HOA boards against individual homeowners. And I would hear that just about every HOA concern that came to my office. They're retaliating against me. I'm the squeaky wheel. Now I don't get anything. They're doing this to me, whatever. So I think, again, the real important part of this is we need to organize, we need to educate, and we need to advocate. That is the key. And this one bill that's in the Senate and the House, and they're going to have hearings on it, we need to show up. And we need to get a hold of our legislators and make some noise. Let them know we're out there and we've got a problem.